Thanks for coming. So for those who don't know me, I'm Darren, or Daz Wallace, and I'm a solution engineer at Iru. Been working with Apple devices for just over 20 years now, including MSPs, consultancies, in-house IT, and now at a vendor. For those who aren't familiar with Iru, it's a unified platform for device management, business compliance, and identity in a single AI-powered system. We have a booth outside if you're interested in chatting with us after this. I'm also one of the organizers for the London Apple Admins Meetup group. You can find me on Slack and most other things as Daz_Wallace. And today, I'm here to talk to you about Apple's new migration options for macOS, iOS, and iPadOS 26, and how those changes make moving between Apple management solutions easier. Maybe this could trigger a mass migration between different solutions. So first of all, let's set the scene. You work in IT. You're at least partly responsible for the organization's Apple devices. You have them all enrolled and managed successfully with your device management of choice. Let's call that solution A. Everything's working fine. Everything's great. You're happy. Suddenly, you have a need to move to another solution. Could be related to cost. Could be related to better features and functionality. Maybe it's a decision made above you in the organization. Maybe there's been some sort of merger or acquisition, and you have to kind of bring those tools together. Or even perhaps solution A is actually shutting down its services, and you need to move off it. Regardless, you now need to move your devices to another solution. Let's call that solution B. What do? What are your options? Well, prior to the OS 26 releases, you only really had two core options from Apple. First of all is an erase and re-enrollment of the device. The other option is to unenroll from your current management service and then manually re-enroll. Possibly you could trigger that by the profiles command for macOS, but generally speaking, it's considered kind of a manual task on that one. Both these options have a risk of data loss, or if you're erasing a device, obviously guarantees it. And both have a certain amount of downtime for your end users. In addition to this, the manual re-enrollment option has a higher risk of users or your engineers making missteps when they're migrating these devices, as well as a time where that device could be in an unmanaged state with company data on it, and you'd struggle with compliancy requirements. Well, neither of those are great options. But with the release of macOS, iOS, and iPadOS 26, Apple have brought us a new option. Apple School Manager and Apple Business Device-Driven Management Service Migration. Let's take a look at how that actually looks. So first of all, this is going to be a live recording, no movie magic, no cut scenes or anything like that. And as you can probably tell, that's an iOS device. And on the right-hand side is our ABM portal, Apple Business Portal. And you might be able to see that the background has EU on it. So this is actually enrolled in my test EU tenant. And I'm going to migrate it to my non-EU tenant. So let's start this now. So first of all, I'm going to go into the Settings app, go into the MDM profile, and just show you it has mention of our EU instance under all the check-in URLs, the management URLs, all that good stuff. We also are deploying Obsidian as a managed application. This is just to give you an example of the data preservation feature for this. Let's also then go into Obsidian, and let's get that note created just to give you an example of that data being kept in place with a local vault. I missed the opportunity here to do a hello world, but we'll stick with hello hi instead for now, just as our example. Right. Enough of that, let's actually trigger this migration process in Apple Business. So we're going to go into Assign Device Management, pick my non-EU instance, and set a deadline. Once that's gone through, Apple is then going to sync that data down to our destination solution. And once that has decided what screens to skip and all that good stuff, it's going to sync the information back to Apple, ready to go. And then what you will eventually see is a pop-up on the iOS device at a stage when it's ready to be migrated. Like I said, no editing here, no cutting, no fast-forwarding. This is all real time. Right, once you get your prompt, hit Start Enrollment. The Settings app opens and prompts a restart. Now, I'm actually recording from a tethered device, so you will not see on this screen where I'm having to then wait for the reboot to complete, the device to unlock, and get the screen recording to continue. So bear that in mind on that one. Nice and silent. Come on, device, end the awkward silence. There we go. So now we've got this pop-up. User's going to hit enroll this iPhone. And then what's going to happen is the device will unenroll from its current management solution. It will then re-enroll to the new management solution and perform any of those await config tasks at that point, which in this case will include assigning licenses to applications so they're not removed off device. Once that process is complete, the device will be released back into the control of the end user, and we can just confirm that migration has completed successfully. The wait was just as painful when I was practicing this presentation. But I wanted to give the example of the real-time, what you'd expect for your end users. Perfect. Hit exit. Let's go into the Settings app and just go back to our MDM profile, and just to show that there's no mention of an EU instance for my test server. Perfect. And just to show you, we are also managing Obsidian through that new service. Right, let's launch Obsidian and just confirm that our locally saved note is still present. There we go. And lastly, just to show you, I actually pushed down a new background image on this device, a new home screen image that says migrated instead of EU. So that's then the device migrated over to the new solution. Perfect, okay. What about macOS? So same sort of process on this one, but as it's a macOS device, I'm actually going to use the same device for the changes in Business Manager as I would be showing you the actual migration process. So again, we have an EU background on this device, just to help differentiate that we've migrated over. Let's launch our System Settings app and go to our device management settings. And again, just to show you that this is tied into my EU tenant, my EU instance, as you can see in the URLs. Perfect, right. Let's go to Apple Business. Let's trigger that migration. Again, assign device management, pick the new server, put a deadline in there. That deadline can be changed, but for this kind of recording, I've just left it at the default value. And again, data's been synchronized down to your destination server. Destination server's making some decisions. That's then going back to Apple. And then once that's done, you should see a pop-up message on this device. And there you go. Click that message. It should then open System Settings in a mode ready to help you migrate your device. Hit that Start Enrollment option. You get a nice big full screen pop-up, and you go ahead. You enter your logged in user's credentials. That does not have to be an administrative user, can be a non-admin user. And again, the same process. Unenroll, enroll into the new solution, sit at the await config section and wait for any additional bits and pieces to come down. We'll come back to the pop-up you would have seen there, but essentially we are no longer managing the endpoint security framework because there's that bit in the middle where there's no device management in place, so users might get that pop-up, but we'll cover that a bit later. Perfect, done, okay. Let's go back to our device management section, just to show you that the device is now enrolled again in my non-EU instance or tenant. And also, if I timed this right, the background image has been changed from the new server to be migrated. And that's it, that's the process. iOS, macOS, nice and easy, no questions, no problems, all done. Thanks for attending, see you next year. Or is it? Not everything can be that easy, right? What is required to make that all work? Are there any kind of issues or limitations that you might encounter with that? So first of all, let's take a quick look at the requirements for this feature. First, the obvious one, your devices are going to need to be on OS 26. That's got to happen when they're still enrolled with the current management solution, so that can then let Apple know what OS the device is running, ready for, or be available for migration. Next, you do need to actually own these devices as an organization. The way Apple understands that is they are registered already in Apple Business or Apple School Manager. They also need to be enrolled in the current MDM solution via automatic device enrollment. You're not going to be using this to onboard unmanaged devices in your fleet. If you've used Apple Configurator to manually add that device to your Business Manager or School Manager, that device will not be eligible until after the 30-day provisional period. Basically, once you use Apple Configurator, get it enrolled in the management server, you need to wait 30 days before it becomes valid for a migration using this method. If you have your device configured for return to service with the new app preservation key option, it's quite a newer feature, that also disqualifies it from migration using this method specifically. It still does say Apple Business Essentials on this KB, but essentially if your device management solution is Apple Business Essentials, or now Apple Business, you cannot use this feature to migrate those devices. So not really ideal if perhaps you're using ABE now, the organization outgrows its usefulness and you want to go to a more maybe feature-rich solution, you can't use Apple's built-in method for migration for that. And lastly, migration is not an option for shared iPads. That one's arguably less of an issue because the nature of a shared iPad means there's some expectation of local data being removed from devices at a whim, so that one's less of an issue. And if you don't meet all of those requirements, you're not going to be able to migrate that specific device using Apple's method. In ABM, the only real indicator is that you have an absence of this add deadline option. On the left is a device that is compatible with the migration service, and on the right is one that is not currently. At least this is what I thought until very recently. Turns out Apple Business Manager, and I believe Apple School Manager, also has a filter that you can use to show devices that can have an enforcement deadline set. Although you still don't have the ability to see why a device might not be eligible for this service. So you're aware of how the process looks and feels and how to trigger it, and the requirements you need to meet in order to utilize that service. What other considerations should you be aware of with this process? First up, App Store apps delivered by the Apps and Books service, previously known as VPP or Volume Purchase Program. These apps are licensed via your management solution, and during the process, they'll obviously be unlicensed. Now, typically, that would mean the uninstallation of the app and the removal of any local data, especially with iOS, iPadOS. The migration feature does have a nice option to preserve apps and their data, but you need to ensure that your destination solution, A, supports this, and B, that you have the necessary configuration for that device that includes assigning a license for that app. Obviously, if you're not assigning an app license to the device in the new solution, the app's just going to get removed as if you didn't deploy it at all. Next up is local agents. So this process from Apple has no ability, at least currently, to run any scripts or commands as part of the migration flow. So you're possibly going to need to run tasks post-migration from your new management solution to clean up any previous agents and software, things like self-service or in-house app stores, any local agents, local binaries, that kind of thing. And in a similar vein to this is your login window replacement solutions. Many out there, Jamf Connect, Mozilla Auth, Xcreds, and our very own Passport, there's nothing that would automate the removal of those as part of this process. So you're going to need to put some thought into how you treat that. For example, with a lot of these solutions, you're managing the license and the configuration via a profile. As part of the migration, those profiles will be removed. So what would happen with those solutions if they were completely unconfigured and unlicensed? Just need to bear that in mind. And there's more. So these all kind of fall under a bigger umbrella of management server delivered items, but still worth a brief mention. So first up, as you saw during the example, any security and/or network extensions. So obviously we're removing the profiles again that are manually kind of allowing these, so they will become potentially disabled. So without that, your user's going to get pop-ups that they might not understand how to deal with them. And those tools may also no longer function. So you might have issues with the compliance status of those devices that maybe require a running EDR at all times. Additionally, you've got networking, so things like Wi-Fi and radius configurations. In my testing, it seems that the devices will actually hang on to those configurations even when they're removed. But it's not foolproof, it's not guaranteed, it's not documented anywhere. So it might be unexpected lucky behavior rather than intended behavior. I hope it's intended though. But be prepared to have other network options available to your devices and your users if they're going through this process. To be honest, it's actually a lot simpler to have them do this whilst not at the office. For example, at home, where they've manually added those Wi-Fi details, or they have, rarely, but they might have a network cable at home that they use. TLS inspection certificates. So if you're in the realm of network filtering or inspection, and you're deploying those via a profile, again, those are going to be removed as part of this process. In theory, you should be excluding the various Apple endpoints and your management solution endpoints from any kind of filtering or messing around with these tools. But you never know when you might miss a particular endpoint that might then break the whole system, or you might have a particularly noisy application installed that's going to keep popping up in the background while this migration is taking place. You may find that you have to actually disable these tools before the migration using your existing solution and then re-enable them with the new solution afterwards. Privacy, preferences, policy, control profiles, or PPC. So any user-approved items shouldn't be disabled with these profiles being removed, but some things like accessibility and full disk access, that kind of stuff, that normally affects like security tools, as well as the stuff that affects your end users running their various applications. Again, just something to be aware of. Make sure you've got those configurations ready in your new solution to pick those up. And lastly, VPN profiles. Pretty much the same as what we've covered of lots of other areas, but essentially those might be removed as part of this migration, so then you lose that VPN, and that might cause you then other issues. So I've shown some additional considerations when using the process, but what other things might you encounter? I wouldn't really call these bugs, but more kind of quirks. I did resist the urge to use a good friend of mine, Steve Quirk's face for this, but maybe I should have done. The first one I encountered was issues pulling down the enrollment information, as shown in this video. So occasionally, I would get the error you see here when that device reaches out to Apple for its enrollment information. It seemed to be intermittent with no easy traceable cause. And it seems to be something along the lines of when the device reboots, it goes through that process so quick that maybe Apple either hasn't synchronized the data around all its endpoints, or perhaps the network isn't fully up on the device. What I did find as well is it a lot worse if you're flipping a device back and forth between servers. For example, recording videos for presentation or for documentation internally. At some points, I had to just leave it an hour and then go back to it. Another one I encountered here was having to manually reselect a Wi-Fi network that I was already connected to. So again, very similar message to what I had previously, but every time I hit that enroll this iPhone, I would get that same message. So instead, I had to go into the choose Wi-Fi network option, as you can see there, and just pick the exact same network I'm connected to. Again, I suspect it's some sort of race condition where things aren't synchronized or maybe things aren't up quickly. So it's one of those things where it might be worth advising your users just to, at that screen, just give it a few seconds before proceeding. Again, it got much worse when I kept flipping it back and forth between different providers. The last big one I found was that it could sometimes take a long time for that notification to be shown to the end user. In the back end, it appears the process is trigger the migration in Apple Business or Apple School Manager. Those changes will sync down to your target solution, your new solution. Your new solution will decide what screens to skip, what screens to show, any kind of information in and around that. It will sync those changes back to Apple. And then once Apple has those changes ready to go, then the user is prompted. So I did find that if you were to manually trigger syncs with your automatic device enrollment token on the destination server, it makes it quicker. But just expect that when you set these things up, there may be a small delay before users start to get prompted. Might not be the worst thing in the world. Oh, and one more thing. Throughout this process, you might want to take some screen recordings for end-user documentation or presentation. Don't forget to set that option in your notification system settings. Otherwise, what you might find is that you're sitting there for a long time, waiting for this notification, wondering why it's not popping in. And it's definitely not something I did for a few recordings for those earlier videos, but just something that's worth bearing in mind. So I spent pretty much this whole talk covering using this new feature from Apple, but what are your other options? What if you can't meet all those requirements, or you want more control over the process? Well, yes, there is lots of other options. So most device management vendors, ourselves included, have some form of migration solution that doesn't rely on being compatible with that OS 26. This might be a script, an agent, a service, might be chargeable, might be included in your license costs. But if you're in a situation where you need to migrate devices, I would strongly suggest reaching out to your vendor support team, account manager, solution engineers, etc. Probably the one of the solution you're going to rather than the one you're coming from, because they might be less inclined to be as helpful. And obviously, I do work for Iru, so my suggestion would be to use our migration agent if we're lucky enough to be welcoming you into us. Our migration agent can help migrate macOS devices into our platform, as well as providing assistance of removing any leftover items from the previous solution. Again, if there's interest, come see myself or some of my fellow SEs at our booth out in the exhibitor hall. But breaking news. Less than a week before this presentation, Apple announced a little change. So the Apple Business Manager has now become Apple Business, replacing all those features you used to go to Apple Business Manager for. So for those of you who already looked into the new portal, you'll notice there's some changes that I haven't updated in my recordings in the presentation. Now, this is because they are limited to the Apple Business side. Apple School Manager is very much still the same as it was previous to these changes. And talking of those changes, what actually changed as far as this, the things I've covered today? First of all, when you log in, you'll see the new landing page showing all the new items unified under this new portal. To get to the devices detail area, you need to click device, funny enough, at the top. Then once here, you get quite a similar view to what you may be used to before. Search for and select whichever devices you want to take action on. And you've got the assign device management button to change that device's enrollment configuration. And there, you've got the same options as you would have seen before on the older Apple Business Manager portal, and the option to set that additional deadline. So what takeaways can I give you? First of all, macOS, iOS, iPadOS 26 have brought Apple Business and Apple School Manager-driven device management migration. Too many words in that one. This process does not wipe device data, and so offers a real usable method to migrate devices, especially your iPad and iOS devices. Previously, it was a very manual process, potentially with data loss. There are a number of requirements for this process to be usable, and there's also some limitations to that process, so it might not necessarily be suitable for all use cases today. And there are alternative options out there. Speak to your vendors, let them know, and as always, please do test these things yourself. So that is scheduled to go out at 4:30, that blog post. So I might have to manually trigger that just after this presentation. But that's it. So that blog post will have a copy of the slides, links to all the things I've mentioned, all that good stuff. Any questions? James is scrambling in the back. Or the front.
Who's got the question? There we go. Always at the back. All right.
Hi, thanks for the presentation.
You're welcome.
I work in a school where we have a number of Mac labs, all managed by us. Is there a way to do this in bulk rather than like one device at a time?
Cool, no worries. So the question was, in a school lab environment, is there a way of completing this process automatically rather than manually? Currently, no. It requires someone to click a few buttons on device. Now, it could be a case if you trigger it all and then just send someone down to one particular lab at a time and go through it. But yes, it will need hands on keyboard or mouse for this process. After this, we need someone right at the very back as well to get James to go up and down. Sorry, mate.
How does it deal with file vault? So how, I know obviously some device management solutions have the key to scroll. Does that copy over, or does it just get like, I don't know what to do with this?
Yeah, so with a lot of these solutions now, when you do enroll into or migrate to a new MDM solution, it will work to automatically re-escrow, generate a new file vault recovery key, for example, and re-escrow that. Some solutions, ourselves included, will detect that, and where if that fails or doesn't work, have other solutions to kind of pick that up. But generally speaking, things like the file vault recovery key, the bootstrap token, that should all be either ported over or regenerated during the migration.
So there are a couple of questions on the app as well. What do you think drives the need for migration the most? Cost, features, UI, or simplicity?
So I've mentioned it a few times. I do work for a vendor, so I'm a little biased. But the real honest answer is the most unhelpful one. It's always a combination. It's very rare that someone looks at their management solution and goes, we're paying too much. There's always a bit more to it than that. It's like, it's costing us too much time, it's costing us too much effort, it's maybe lacking features. I know there's a particular solution that's announced end-of-life support, well, end-of-life effectively. So there's lots of different drivers, there's a real mix. And in true me fashion, I've given you a very unhelpful but honest answer.
Okay, we can do one more from here.
There's one at the back as well, whenever you're ready.
God damn it.
Sorry.
So it requires user interaction. You set a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for the user? Is there a point where they're forced to do it, they can no longer work? What does the deadline actually mean for the process and for the end user?
Sure. So it's similar to if you've ever set a password requirement on an iOS device. You get like an hour leeway to do it, but every time you go back to the home screen, it pops up.
Yep.
Once that hour's gone, it pops up and you have no option to dismiss it. For the macOS side of things, it's a big full screen, and there's no option to kind of cancel or come out of it. So there's improvement that could be made there to make that kind of, well, go the extra step of just cracking on with it. But that's kind of how it works at the moment. So if you get to the deadline, you'll have a big full screen pop-up that you can't remove. And the same with the sort of iOS device. You'll have that big pop-up, and it will not be dismissible.
Cool. So it's about communicating, setting the deadline, users know what's going to happen and when, but they're left with no choice at that final point. Thank you.
Once it hits that deadline, they've got no further choice. So usual recommendations, do some test devices, get loads and loads of screenshots and all that good stuff, and just get that communication out to your users. And just be honest with them and say, look, if you don't do it by this date, you will be doing it by this date. So let's do it beforehand rather than wait until the very last minute when obviously C-level staff members are about to go into a huge board meeting. Let's kind of try and be a bit helpful on that one. Oh dear.
Well done. If it's just the thank him, I'm going to lose my mind.
We need one of the throw mics.
Excellent presentation, Des.
Thank you.
One of the best at the show, I think. You've mentioned app preservation, right, as you're moving between MDM. So what should folks consider for app license management, right? Have they got to remove all the licenses from one location and reassign them to the other location in advance, duplicate all their licenses? What needs to be done there?
Sure. So essentially, if you're looking to migrate with app preservation, you're going to need to have licenses available in the destination solution. You don't want to remove them from the source one until you're ready, because then you'll be uninstalling the apps anyway. If it's a free app, perfect. Buy as many licenses as you need, job done. When I say that, don't buy 1 million. I've had people do that in the past because it causes all kinds of problems. buy what you need, but buy the extra free ones. For the paid ones, if you have the capacity, move any unassigned ones over, and then just monitor it as you go through. And as they're more and more released from the source server, assign them to the destination one, and hopefully you'll get a nice rotation. But there might be a scenario where you need to make a couple of purchases just to tide you over that time period for that.
Yeah, I've just got a question about when we migrated, we were in a situation where we had iOS devices deployed and there was data on there that could not be wiped. So this is a couple of years ago, so we used user-approved MDM. And so that's how it is now, and obviously that's not ideal because that can be removed. Could you use this process in some way to actually get out of user-approved and then into actually shaking heads?
Yeah, so a little peek behind the curtain. Those who use the profiles command to manually migrate macOS devices, if you have it set up to not allow MDM MDM profile removal, it will honor that setting when you're enrolling, because it basically treats it as an ADE enrollment but doesn't show setup assistant. So if you have that configuration in your MDM solution, and obviously if you're using this process, it will be using Apple Business Manager, then yes, those profiles would not be removable by the end user. Does that answer the question? Cool.